Video games can be great vehicles for mysteries. Gathering clues, questioning witnesses, and giving dramatic speeches where you stun an array of suspects with your intellect make for an exciting fantasy.
If he broke the cane somewhere nearby, he might have tossed it away there.
But lots of games stumble trying to fit the inherently open-ended, red string connecting fantasy of the detective into traditionally linear story structures. The Inquisitor is a game like that. It starts with the compelling concept of playing as a medieval church cop hunting a vampire, but it always puts the strings on the board for you, and thus never really lives up to the potential of its premise.
You lied to me, merchant. You didn't buy the Mary Executioner's costume. You took it from the old lady that you burned at the stake.
As Inquisitor Mortimer Matterdine, you've been dispatched to investigate a European town called Königstein. What's more, the story is based on the dark fantasy novels of Polish writer Jacek Piekara, imagining an alternate religious history where Jesus Christ broke free of his crucifixion and led a vengeful army to conquer the Roman Empire. As a result, characters will describe how mercilessness, retribution, and the ends justifying the means are virtues of their religion. For a story-driven game that promises tough decisions to make in conversations and interrogations, it's an excellent setup. Lots of games will put moral questions to you, but what you consider moral in our reality might not be what the characters consider moral in this one.
The Holy Office does not tolerate lynching.
And you might need to worry about how others will interpret your actions in ways you don't expect. At least, that's the underlying idea of the Inquisitor, but it doesn't ever really land that feeling. The consequences of your actions shake out pretty much the way you'd expect them to, whether you're nice or mean. Or at least, that's how it seemed to me over 2 complete playthroughs, with the first taking me around 8 hours. How and when your choices affect the story isn't particularly clear in most cases, and a mostly linear, straightforward structure makes it difficult to tell if and when you're able to move things in different directions.
Don't do it, Master. The captain will throw me out of the guard. I beg you, have mercy.
That said, the story the Inquisitor tells is a fairly compelling one. The writing is largely solid, with interesting characters that are mostly well-voiced, although a few look at you with animatronic-like eyes that seem like they're trying to escape their heads.
I know what you're thinking, Master Matterdine, but you are mistaken.
Königstein's art direction successfully gives it a dirty, lived-in atmosphere. It's bigger than it needs to be in a way that makes it feel like a town, not a gameplay space that only exists to hold your objectives. The drawback is that it's so big that most of your time is spent sprinting from one end to the other. As an investigator, you'll eavesdrop on conversations,
Can't be pulling those tricks with us. We don't haggle.
examine murder victims, and scope out crime scenes.
Bad news always travels quickly. Get her out of here.
And these moments generally tell you exactly how many clues to gather before you can move on. Most of your clue collecting ability comes from the Inquisitor's version of detective vision. When Mortimer prays, the landscape goes gray and important elements like your destination, collectible notes, clues, or scent trails you can follow are all highlighted. Vision modes like the Inquisitor's always seem like a necessary evil, but that didn't stop praying from feeling like a crutch whenever I used it. It's difficult to tell what's interactive and what isn't, or to see details like a blood trail without highlighting them, but having exactly what you're looking for light up orange removes any requirement for critical thinking.
It appears he's treated his wounds.
You have more agency in interviews and interrogations.
Do you need anything else?
Information.
People often lie to you, so whether you're polite or brusque can determine how forthcoming they'll be. At the same time, it's tough to see where the failure points are or if you've messed up.
Rightly so, I think, as he never tipped me.
In this torturous interrogation, you can take the suspect at his word or increase the pain. I played the scene twice, varying my approach the second time, knowing I'd gotten false information before. But the extra info I uncovered didn't actually lead to anything new, and I was still left chasing a lie. Following up questions and lies like this pushes you into the Inquisitor's more action-focused levels in a place called the Unworld. Mortimer can project himself into a sort of astral plane where it's possible to piece together visions of past events and learn what actually happened.
Should have sold me the mask and costume when I was asking nicely. Which
These sequences give Mortimer a supernatural cheat code, which then makes a lot of those clue hunts and interrogations feel unnecessary. Why bother asking people for answers if you're just going to use a magical surveillance system anyway? The Unworld puts you in a twisted, dark reflection of Königstein, where you're constantly dodging the detection of a flying eyeball called the Merc, while you search for 5 pieces of a vision to trigger a cutscene. To avoid the Merc's searching gaze, you'll need to dip under overhangs and pick the right paths. More interesting aspects are added over time, such as sword-wielding enemies and black mist that slows you down, and you'll even unlock useful abilities, like a blast of light to temporarily blind the Merc. The first couple of these levels are tense, but once I realized enemies are predictable enough that you can pretty much just sprint straight to each objective, they cease to be stressful. Lack of challenge thanks to general clunkiness is a problem throughout the Inquisitor, weakening its otherwise decent ideas. There are several times when you'll engage in sword fights, a system that includes standards like light and heavy attacks, and a parry that opens enemies up to counterattack. Theoretically, duels should be tense dances, where you identify your opponent's moves and react with the appropriate counter. But I won just about every fight by executing 1 or 2 perfect parries and then overwhelming them with a flurry of strikes. The Inquisitor has a couple of tougher boss fights against more interesting foes, but most of the battles are easily won because enemies just can't keep up with you.
Rejoice, scum! You're about to meet the Creator.
Action sequences aren't the main thrust of the Inquisitor, though. Easy fights and simplistic QuickTime events could be forgiven, as could blobby faces and minor gaffes like characters clipping into one another, if the investigation and story were strong enough.
There hasn't been a recorded sighting of one in these parts for what must have been a century.
But those don't give you enough agency to really feel satisfying. Mortimer always tells you exactly where to go and what to do next. When I hit my first ending, a character chided me for allowing events to transpire that led to a negative outcome. But after a second playthrough, I'm still not sure where I messed up, except for a particular conversation where I was supposed to stall for time but didn't stall enough. I had no way of knowing which choices would have stalled more than others either. Even when I made specific choices with the benefit of hindsight, like choosing to avoid a fight I knew would get a character killed, resulting in another later trying to kill Mortimer in revenge, that later scene still played out as if that person had been killed. There are a few distinct choices that lead to different situations like this one, but they don't seem to materially affect the story, and I never saw opportunities to search for different clues or follow alternate leads. There are occasional technical issues that undercut the experience as well. The Inquisitor's best sequence takes you into a maze-like dungeon, where you confront a murderous jester who's constantly rhyming and playing a flute.
I shall make him disappear! Tis a trick!
This guy is creepy. And when you find him dismembering a victim, he disappears among the jail cells, forcing you to follow his taunts emanating from the shadows. The dinginess of the dungeon under torchlight and the cackling couplets from the darkness all made for something that was really fun, tense, and spooky, until I got lost in the maze. For some reason, the prayer ability didn't work throughout this sequence, even though prompts appeared telling me to use it. So in a later portion, when there was no sound for me to follow, I was stuck just running around the dungeon trying to figure out what the Inquisitor wanted me to do. Eventually, I stumbled on the solution when I happened to pass an item that created a button prompt, but by then, all the tension and fright had been drained out. The Inquisitor takes place in a fascinating dark world, and its story often puts you in strange and interesting situations. Searching for a vampire and trying to solve murders in a medieval town is a great idea, and it's compelling to search a scene for clues, to try to puzzle out the best choices in conversations and interrogations, and to attempt to stitch the whole thing together.
The killer cut out the liver.
How do you know that?
But it doesn't pay off its ambition, whether that's because of action scenes that are never really challenging, or choices that are either too opaque to see where they're taking you, or take you to the same destination regardless of what you pick. The Inquisitor is always holding your hand too tightly, and as a result, it's a detective game that does most of the detecting for you.
It's easy to order an assassination. But to do the killing yourself, that is an entirely different matter.
For two different and far more successful takes on otherworldly investigations that do give you the freedom to piece together answers for yourself, check out our reviews of Outer Wilds or The Return of the Obra Dinn. And for everything else, stick with IGN.